A boy's lunch, a hungry crowd, one prayer. Watch how a tiny offering becomes an echo of God's generosity and how your small act can change people's lives. Stay 60 seconds, then stay for the whole lesson. Jesus feeds 5,000, faith in action. In every generation, people ask, how did Jesus feed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish? Today we'll walk the shoreline of Galilee, read the gospel accounts side by side, unpack the cultural clues that matter, and most importantly pull out faith in action lessons you can use now. No flashy hype, just clear scripture and practical steps. Scripture reference, Matthew 14:13-21, Mark 6:30-44. Luke 9:10-17, John 6:1-14. Read the story, 4 gospel snapshots. Quickly the essentials. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all record a similar event. A huge crowd follows Jesus to a remote place. Jesus has compassion and heals the sick. Evening comes, and the disciples worrying about feeding the crowd. A boy offers 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Jesus blesses, breaks, and distributes, and everyone eats. The leftovers fill 12 baskets. John's version explicitly calls the loaves barley, and several passages emphasize Jesus' compassion and testing of faith. These 4 complementary accounts form a remarkably consistent portrait. Which gospel do you prefer? Comment Mark, Matthew, Luke, or John. Setting the scene: geography, crowd, and logistics. To picture this, imagine a hillside along the Sea of Galilee. The Gospels say 5,000 men were fed. That's male heads only. If women and children are included, Luke and Mark imply this, the total could be 10,000 or more. Logistically, feeding a crowd like that without modern distribution systems is a major feat. Food scarcity is real in the ancient world. The crowd's hunger is physical but also symbolic. People were spiritually hungry for teaching, mercy, and healing. 5,000 men fed gives likely many more total people. And notice Mark and John. Mark notes the crowd is like sheep without a shepherd, Mark 6:34. John calls the loaves barley, the food of the poor, emphasizing that Jesus feeds the least advantaged. This humility is the first key. Jesus feeds people where they are, with what they have. The small lunch, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Cultural meaning. What did 5 loaves and 2 fish mean in that setting? John specifically calls them barley loaves. Barley was a coarser grain consumed by the poor, unlike wheat or choice bread. So the meal's raw materials belonged to the boy, not an elite banquet. That detail matters. The miracle begins with the offering of a small, ordinary lunch, not a princely feast. The raw ingredients point to God's pattern. Use what's on hand. Barley equals staple of the poor. Historically, fish were common in Galilee. Fishermen supplied them. The boys to fish could have come from a family dependent on fishing, making this an offering of genuine personal value, not a token gesture. The disciples' reaction, scarcity mindset and a faith test. The disciples react like many of us would, practical concern first. Philip or Andrew, depending on the gospel, asks where to buy bread. The problem seems logistical. But Jesus reframes it into a faith moment. You give them something to eat, paraphrase. He tests the disciples. Can they move from panic to partnership? This is a ritualized moment where human 1 plus God will become collaboration. Notice 2 leadership lessons. 1 leaders must face real constraints, and 2 leaders must resist the temptation to default to impossibility. Jesus invites creative faith, not denial of reality. Type faith if you've been asked to do something big with small resources. Jesus prays, blesses, breaks, and distributes, mechanics and symbolism. The sequence is telling. Jesus takes the loaves, looks up to heaven, gives thanks, breaks them, and gives them to the disciples to distribute. That pattern, blessing and breaking, echoes table rituals and later becomes the shape of Christian Eucharistic practice: blessing, breaking, sharing. John and the synoptics all present this order. Divine blessing precedes multiplication. The miracle is not magic, but sacramental. Thanksgiving transforms scarcity into abundance. Bless gives, break gives, distribute equals sacramental rhythm. Another note, Jesus gives the food to the disciples to distribute. This isn't a solo wonder, it's participatory. God multiplies through people. That's the second big principle. God uses human hands. The leftovers, 12 baskets and symbolic abundance. After everyone ate, the disciples gathered leftovers, 12 baskets full. The number 12 rings throughout Scripture, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles signifying wholeness and covenant people. So the abundance is not merely physical, it's covenantal and missional, enough for all, and still more to share across the community. God's provision exceeds need and points to corporate blessing. This abundance reframes scarcity. God provides enough, and the surplus fuels further mission. Practically, when we share, resources multiply in community. Gospel comparisons, what each gospel emphasizes. Each gospel adds a slant. Mark 6:30-44 emphasizes Jesus' compassion and the disciples' astonishment. Mark is practical and fast. Matthew 14:13-21 highlights Jesus as teacher and king, with an interest in fulfilling prophecy and demonstrating Jesus' authority over need. Luke 9:10-17 links the miracle to mission and hospitality. Luke cares about meals as social identity. John 6:1-14 stresses the sign aspect. John frames the feeding as a sign pointing to Jesus as the bread of life, which John later develops in John 6. John also specifies barley loaves. Together these portraits give a full image: compassion, sign, teaching, and mission. That is why the story appears in all four Gospels. It's a hinge event that reveals who Jesus is and what his kingdom does. Theological meanings: compassion, sign of the kingdom. Eucharistic foreshadowing: the miracle has multiple theological layers. 1. Compassion. The immediate motive is compassion. Jesus sees the crowd, feels pity, and acts. This shows God's pastoral heart. Mark 6:34. To sign of the kingdom. In John's theology, miracles are signs revealing Jesus' identity. Feeding 5,000 becomes an initial chapter in John's argument. Jesus is the bread of life, John 6. The sign points to spiritual nourishment that Jesus offers. 3. Foreshadowing: the Eucharist, the pattern of blessing, breaking, and distributing echoes the Lord's Supper. Early Christian readers saw Eucharistic resonance. Jesus gives thanks, breaks bread, and people eat, anticipating the sacrament of communion. This is not the sole meaning, but it's an important layer. For social justice, economic reordering, the fact that the food is barley and the leftovers are abundant suggests a reversal of scarcity. The kingdom's economy redistributes resources, so the poor are fed. Social implications: the gospel addresses real needs, not only spiritual abstractions. Which meaning stood out to you? Comment. Compassion, sign, Eucharist, or justice. Modern practical examples: community feeding and sharing networks. This story isn't only ancient theology, it's an organizing principle for church mission today. Practical models that mirror the feeding miracle. 1. Community kitchens, soup kitchens that feed hundreds weekly. 2. Food share apps and resource mapping where neighbors share surplus food. 3. Buy One, Give One initiatives that link consumer purchase with giving. 4. Disaster response teams that mobilize small donations into mass distribution. Each model echoes the story's pattern. People bring what they have, leaders coordinate. God multiplies through community action. Now your turn. Comment one small thing you'll offer this week: time, food, talent, or funds. Like, subscribe, and tap the bell. These stories matter and they scale when shared. The feeding of the 5,000 shows a God who sees, blesses, and multiplies. It asks us to bring honest gifts, trust that blessing precedes multiplication, and partner with God to feed people. If this moved you, share one micro testimony, and subscribe for more scripture-rooted, action-focused videos. Walk in generosity. Small hands make big miracles. Until next time.